Welcome back, everyone, to Echoes of Ihsan. Today, we're embarking on, you could say, a pretty epic journey.
Oh, I like that. A journey. I'm ready.
Well, pack your bags, because we're diving deep into Sahih al-Bukhari, Book 59, Military Expeditions Led by the Prophet. And I know when you hear military expeditions, you might immediately think of, battles.
Right, yeah. Conquests, the clash of swords, the whole nine yards.
Exactly. But this book, it offers so much more than that. It's like a window into the lives of those who walked with the Prophet, their struggles, triumphs, their unwavering faith. We'll uncover surprising details that I think really grapple with the human side of these historical figures.
You're so right. What always strikes me about this book is how it doesn't shy away from the complexities of human emotion. Even amidst war and conflict, you find fear, doubt, compassion, even humor woven into these narratives.
It's amazing, right? It makes those historical figures come alive. It makes them relatable. So the first section throws us right into the deep end with premonitions and facing fate. It starts with the story of Umayyah bin Khalaf, who has this premonition of his own death at the Battle of Badr.
This one always sends chills down my spine.
Hmm.
Imagine knowing your fate and trying to run from it. Umayyah, he was a prominent Meccan leader, and the fact that he's confronted with this knowledge of his own demise, it adds this whole other layer of psychological tension to the story. He tries to defy fate by staying behind, but the pressure from his peers, especially Abu Jahl, forces him onto the battlefield.
It's almost like Abu Jahl is goading him into it, isn't it? Like, come on, man up, face your fears. What do you think that says about their relationship?
That's such a good question. You see Umayyah's inner conflict. He knows what awaits him, but he's also bound by those societal expectations, his pride. It's a stark reminder that these individuals, even in these historical narratives, they were wrestling with very real, very human emotions. And we see that play out in a really dramatic way at Badr.
Because that's where Abu Jahl meets his end, right?
Right.
And the details of his death are pretty intense.
They really are. It's a vivid and detailed account. You can practically see it unfolding before your eyes. Abdullah bin Masud confronts Abu Jahl in his final moments. And even as he's dying, Abu Jahl's personality just shines through that defiance, that unwavering belief in his cause, even if it was, misguided.
It's fascinating how even in death, some people just refuse to let go of their convictions. It makes you wonder about the nature of belief, the power of those deeply held convictions, even when they might lead to destruction.
Absolutely. And then there's this other account, this intriguing little detail about an old man who refuses to prostrate during the prophet's recitation of Surah An-Najm. It's almost like foreshadowing, isn't it? A glimpse into his eventual fate.
It makes you wonder about the choices we make. Do we have free will, or is everything predetermined?
That's a question that's been debated for centuries. But the fact that he's later found dead, labeled an infidel, it seems to solidify this idea of his decision sealing his fate.
It's a chilling reminder that our choices have consequences. Sometimes those consequences are irreversible. And then amidst all the chaos and bloodshed, we find these tangible relics from the battle, like the story of Az-Zubair's sword, with that unique dent.
Oh yeah, a dent so specific that it was later recognized by Abdul Malik bin Marwan, the Umayyad Caliph, years later.
It's incredible, right? It's like holding a piece of history in your hands. And it takes us to the next section, the price of faith and sacrifice. This is where we encounter the heartbreaking story of Haritha, the young boy martyred at Badr.
That one gets to me every time. His mother's conversation with the prophet about paradise, it's just so raw, so full of emotion. It speaks to the unimaginable grief of losing a child, especially in such a traumatic way. But it also highlights the profound faith and understanding that the early Muslims had about the afterlife.
Right. The prophet, he assures Haritha's mother that her son is in the highest level of paradise, and that offers her some solace. And then we have the story of Hatib bin Abi Balta. He tries to communicate with the Meccans despite being a companion of the prophet, which sparks a huge debate.
This is where things get really complicated, right? Here's a man who fought alongside the prophet at Badr, yet he takes this action that seems like a betrayal of everything they stand for. His motives, trying to protect his family in Mecca, add another layer of complexity.
It's like he's caught between two worlds, two loyalties.
Yeah.
And Umar, well, his reaction is so fierce. He's furious and wants Hatib punished severely. But then the prophet responds in a completely different way.
It's remarkable, isn't it? The prophet shows compassion. He recognizes Hatib's motives, even if he doesn't condone his actions. And when he talks about Allah possibly looking at those who fought at Badr and forgiving them for their past deeds, it's so profound.
It's a reminder that forgiveness is a cornerstone of Islam, that even those who make mistakes are capable of redemption. It makes you think about your own life,
Yeah.
your own mistakes. Have you ever done something that seemed unforgivable? And then you found that forgiveness, that mercy.
It's a powerful feeling, isn't it? That release, that sense of being given a second chance. And that brings us to tales of captivity and compassion. The story of Kubayb, who's captured and sold as a slave in Mecca, is particularly moving.
Absolutely. It's that detail about him comforting Al-Harith's daughter when she's afraid for her son's safety. Imagine that. You're a prisoner facing death, and yet you still have the capacity to empathize with another person's fear.
It speaks volumes about Kubayb's character. And then there's that image of him eating grapes while he's in chains. It's seen as a sign of divine provision.
It's a powerful image, right? Even in captivity, even facing death, Kubayb is being cared for. It reminds me of that verse in the Quran. And whoever relies upon Allah, then he is sufficient for him. So powerful. And then we come to the aftermath. Life and loss in the aftermath. Subaya bint al-Harith, she's widowed during Hajjat al-Wada, the Prophet's farewell pilgrimage. And she goes to him for guidance about remarrying.
It's a simple story, but it highlights the Prophet's role as a source of wisdom and knowledge, not just in matters of faith, but in everyday life as well. He patiently explains the waiting period she must observe before remarrying.
It's really about seeking guidance, right? Turning to those who have knowledge and wisdom when we're facing difficult decisions. And it reminds me of another section of the book that really resonated with me, honoring legacy and lineage. We have the story of Azubair's spear.
Oh, yes. Passed down from one leader to the next, it becomes the symbol of leadership and inheritance. First the Prophet, then Abu Bakr, then Umar, then Uthman, and finally Ali. It's fascinating how objects can carry so much weight, so much meaning.
And it's not just about the object itself, it's about what it represents. The continuity of leadership, the passing of the torch from one generation to the next. And then we have this anecdote about Arubai Muid's wedding night. The girls are singing about the Prophet, and his reaction to their words is so telling.
He's so humble. He doesn't bask in the adulation. He gently steers their attention away from him.
He's a model of humility,
Right.
He's reminding them and us to focus on what truly matters, Allah.
And then there's that story about Hamza, the Prophet's uncle, being drunk. And the Prophet's reaction is so gentle.
Oh, it just makes you smile. It's one of those stories that reminds us that the Prophet was human. He had a sense of humor. He understood human weakness.
He wasn't this distant, unapproachable figure. He was someone who could relate to people on their level.
Yeah.
And when Abu Ubaidah arrives with all that money from Bahrain, the Prophet reassures the Ansar, those who had sacrificed so much for Islam.
He reminds them that their true wealth lies in their faith and their service to Allah. It's a message that's so relevant for us today. What do we truly value? Material possessions or something deeper, something more lasting?
Absolutely. And then we come to one of the most powerful sections of the book, reflecting on Badr. The Prophet goes to the well of Badr and addresses the slain enemies. It's haunting, isn't it? And Abdullah bin Rasood, he asks the Prophet if he can speak to them.
And the Prophet says they can't hear you any better than they could before. It's a reminder of the spiritual dimension of this battle, that the consequences extend beyond this earthly life.
And then we have the discussion about inheriting the Prophet's property. It's a pivotal moment because it establishes that Prophet's possessions aren't to be inherited like worldly goods.
Umar is adamant about this. He reminds everyone of the Prophet's own words. We prophets, we don't leave any inheritance. What we leave behind is charity.
It sets a precedent for future generations, that leadership in the Muslim community isn't about lineage or inheritance, but about piety and devotion to Allah. And then things get really intense with strategies and sacrifice. The assassination of Ka'b bin al-Ashraf is like a scene out of a spy thriller.
Oh yeah, all those details, the perfume, the touch, the meticulous planning. It shows the strategic thinking and calculated risks that the early Muslims sometimes had to take.
And the story of Abu Rafi's assassination is equally gripping. It underscores the dangers involved in these operations.
It was a different time, a time of constant threat and danger. They were fighting for their survival, for their faith. And these stories remind us of the sacrifices they made.
And then we enter the final days of the Prophet's life, his final address. It's so poignant. He warns against the allure of worldly possessions, reminding everyone that this life is temporary.
He's urging his followers and all of us to focus on the hereafter, to prioritize spiritual values over material wealth.
And even in his final days, he's still leading. The Battle of Hunain, with its initial setback, it shows the Prophet's unwavering faith, his determination.
He doesn't give up even when things look bleak. He rallies his followers, and they ultimately achieve victory.
And the story of the woman who asks about paradise and then fights so bravely. What a testament to the faith of those early Muslim women.
Absolutely. They were active participants in the struggle for Islam, not just passive observers.
Their stories are truly inspiring. And then we have Khabbab bin al-Art's reflection. He talks about those who fought alongside the Prophet, how some receive their rewards in this life, while others will receive theirs in the hereafter.
It's a powerful reminder that our ultimate reward lies in Allah's pleasure, and that our actions, even if they don't bring immediate results, are never in vain. They're all part of a larger divine plan.
And then we have those stories about sharing the spoils, about compassion and justice in action. The story of Jabir bin Abdullah and his father's debt, it just warms the heart.
The Prophet goes to great lengths to make sure the debt is repaid. He's a true leader, concerned for the well-being of his followers, ensuring fairness for everyone.
And Abu Talha's dedication during the Battle of the Trench is truly inspiring. He's willing to put his life on the line to protect the Prophet and the community.
It speaks to that deep bond of brotherhood, that willingness to sacrifice for something greater than oneself.
And that sense of community is so evident in the stories of the women. Salit's service during the Battle of the Trench.
It shows that women played a vital role in the early Muslim community. They weren't confined to their homes. They were out there contributing, making a difference.
And then we have the gripping story of Washi, the man who killed Hamza. His detailed account of the events, it's both chilling and fascinating.
It offers a glimpse into the complexity of human nature, the darkness that can reside within us. But it also shows the transformative power of Islam, how it can lead even those who have committed terrible acts to find redemption.
And then we have the story of Aisha and the false accusations against her. It's a challenging story, full of pain and betrayal. But it also highlights the importance of seeking truth, of not giving in to gossip and slander.
And the Prophet's response, the way he handles this incredibly delicate situation, it's a lesson in patience, in seeking justice, and in trusting in Allah's plan.
And then we come to the story of Ka'b bin Malik, who stayed behind during the Tabuk expedition. His struggle with honesty and deception, his eventual confession, his repentance. It's a story that many of us can relate to on a personal level.
It shows that even those close to the Prophet weren't perfect. They made mistakes, but they also sought forgiveness, and they were ultimately redeemed.
And it all culminates with the Prophet's instructions about approaching those who have been punished with humility and compassion. And then, of course, Aisha's account of the Prophet's last days, his final words. It's both heartbreaking and inspiring.
It reminds us that even the greatest among us must eventually face death, that our time on this earth is finite.
But the legacy the Prophet left behind, the impact he had on the world, it will continue to inspire and guide us for generations to come.
And that's the beauty of studying these stories, these narratives. They offer us glimpses into the lives of those who came before us. They challenge us, they inspire us, and they ultimately lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves and our faith.
So as we move forward, we'll continue to explore these stories, these journeys, these moments of faith and struggle, of triumph and loss.
And hopefully, along the way, we'll discover something new about ourselves, about our history, and about the timeless wisdom of Islam.
Stay tuned for more. And in the meantime, may peace and blessings be upon you.
And upon you as well. You know, as we dive deeper into these military expeditions, I think it's so important to remember the historical context.
Okay, so we're not talking about battles just for the sake of battles.
Exactly. These weren't wars of aggression, you know. They weren't launched out of nowhere. They were often defensive reactions to the persecution that the early Muslims faced, or they were necessary to secure those trade routes.
Right, those trade routes were vital for the community's survival. So it's all about survival, defense, and building a community in a pretty volatile time, right?
Precisely. And the expedition of Dual Khalasa is a perfect example. This campaign was led by Jarir al-Bachali, and it targeted this major idol worship site in Yemen.
It was strategic, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It dismantled a symbol of opposition to Islam and really solidified the spread of the new faith. And it kind of reminds me of when they destroyed all those idols around the Kaaba during the conquest of Mecca.
Can you imagine what that must have looked like?
Yeah.
Hundreds of idols just gone.
I know, right? 360 idols. It was a huge symbol of that shift from polytheism to monotheism, a defining moment for sure.
It must have been incredible to witness that, to see the old ways being swept away and a new era beginning. And speaking of the conquest of Mecca, it's amazing how it was largely achieved without bloodshed.
The Prophet's emphasis on forgiveness and reconciliation during that conquest is just remarkable.
It's true. He could have sought revenge, right? After all the persecution he and his followers had endured.
Exactly. But instead, he offered them amnesty, a chance to embrace Islam.
It really speaks volumes about his character, his commitment to peace, and it's a model of leadership that we could all learn from, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It challenges us to rise above our own instincts for revenge and actively pursue peace, even with those who have wronged us.
It's a message that the world needs now more than ever, don't you think? With all the conflict and division, it's like we've forgotten how to listen to each other, to understand each other.
You're so right. And it makes you think about those early Muslims, like that woman from the tribe of Kathem who wanted to join the battle even though she had responsibilities at home.
Oh, yeah. She wasn't going to be left out of something so important to her.
Exactly. She wanted to be part of it. It wasn't just about the men. Those women were deeply committed to their faith and were willing to do whatever they could to defend it.
And that's a legacy that continues to this day, wouldn't you say? Muslim women are active in so many different fields now, making their voices heard, making a difference in the world.
It's so inspiring to see. They're carrying on that tradition of strength and resilience. Okay, now let's talk about the Battle of Hunain. It's a really interesting example of how even the Prophet and his followers could underestimate their opponents and face setbacks.
So it's a reminder that we all make mistakes, even the best of us.
Exactly. The initial defeat, the near rout of the Muslim army, it's a reminder that victory is never guaranteed.
And yet the Prophet doesn't panic, does he?
Not at all. He rallies his followers, reminding them of their faith, their strength.
And they eventually turn the tide, achieve victory. It's a great lesson in resilience and the power of faith.
And speaking of inspiration, that story about the woman who asks about paradise and then fights so bravely, it just shows the depth of faith among those early Muslim women.
It's powerful, isn't it?
Hmm.
They weren't just sitting on the sidelines waiting for things to happen. They were actively involved, shaping their own destinies.
And their courage and conviction are truly inspiring. Now, the expedition to Tabuk is another significant event, and I think the story of Ka'b bin Malik really stands out. Oh, absolutely. He stayed behind, remember, and later he had to grapple with the consequences of his decision.
His internal struggle, his initial attempts to justify his absence, it's so human, so relatable. We've probably all been there at some point, haven't we? Trying to make excuses for our mistakes.
It's a very human story.
But in the end, Cobb chooses honesty over self-preservation, right?
He does. He repents sincerely, and he faces the consequences. And the Prophet forgives him. It's a powerful example of the transformative power of truth and forgiveness.
It's never too late to acknowledge our mistakes and seek redemption.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the Prophet's final days, his parting instructions. It's a glimpse into his character, his values.
His last address, where he warns about the temptations of this world, is a reminder that our time here is temporary.
It's a powerful message, isn't it? It's so easy to get caught up in the material world and forget what truly matters.
But the Prophet's words bring us back to reality. They remind us to focus on the eternal. And his instruction about approaching those who have been punished with humility and compassion, that's a lesson in empathy.
It's about understanding that everyone makes mistakes, everyone faces struggles, and it's our duty to show kindness and compassion even when it's difficult.
The account of the Prophet's death is incredibly moving. It's a reminder that even the greatest among us must eventually face that final journey.
And his final words, "O Allah, with the highest companion," they show his unwavering focus on the afterlife.
It's a beautiful reminder that our journey in this world is just a preparation for what lies beyond. So as we reflect on these military expeditions, we need to remember that they weren't just about battles and conquests.
Right. They were about establishing a community, defending their faith, creating a way of life that would ultimately change the course of history.
These stories offer us glimpses into the challenges, the sacrifices, the unwavering faith of those who came before us.
They inspire us to live with purpose and meaning,
Stand up for what we believe in,
to show compassion to others.
and to strive for excellence in everything we do. And, this book, it also takes us into those personal lives, those challenges faced by the Prophet's companions. We see their struggles, their triumphs, their unwavering faith.
A great example is Adi bin Hatim. He had doubts about Islam at first, but eventually embraced it wholeheartedly.
It's a reminder that even those who start with skepticism can find truth and guidance in Islam.
It's about approaching faith with an open mind. And the interaction between Adi and Umar later on is so telling.
Umar acknowledges Adi's lineage, even though Adi only became Muslim later.
It shows the inclusivity of that early Muslim community. They welcomed him as a brother, didn't hold his past against him.
It's about valuing individuals for their character and their faith, regardless of their background or when they converted.
And that spirit of inclusivity is also evident in the story of the delegation from the tribe of Arabia.
They meet with the prophet, and there's this emphasis on open dialogue, understanding, building relationships.
The prophet patiently answers their questions, guides them toward a deeper understanding of Islam, and he focuses on those core principles: prayer, charity, avoiding harmful practices.
It's a reminder that Islam offers a way of life that's accessible to everyone, regardless of their background.
And then there's that story about the revenue that came from Bahrain. It shows the prophet's honesty and trustworthiness.
He makes promises about how the money will be distributed, and even though he could have kept it for himself, he doesn't.
He entrusts Abu Bakr to fulfill those promises. It shows his commitment to honoring his word. And speaking of justice, the story of Khalid bin al-Walid and the tribe of Jahima really highlights the prophet's dedication to fairness and mercy.
Khalid's actions initially seem harsh, but the prophet stepped in.
He emphasizes the importance of honoring agreements, of showing compassion.
Justice and mercy must prevail, even in times of conflict.
And the prophet holds his commanders accountable. No one is above the law.
And that story about the fire during one of the campaigns, it's a reminder that obedience has its limits.
Those soldiers refused to enter the fire, even though their commander ordered them to.
They understood that sometimes you have to follow your conscience, even if it means disobeying an order.
And the story of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari and Wad bin Jabal, they're appointed as governors, and their conversations with the prophet, they're full of lessons about leadership.
They ask questions, they seek guidance, they learn about the responsibilities of leadership.
And the prophet advises them to be kind, to be just, to avoid harshness.
Compassion and fairness are so essential, especially for those in positions of authority.
Now, this book also delves into some of those social and cultural practices of the time, like the story of that effeminate man who enters the women's quarters.
It shows the prophet's concern for protecting women's privacy and safety, and the story of Safiya, who was captured during the Battle of Khaybar.
That's a really powerful one. The prophet treats her with kindness, respect, and eventually marries her after freeing her.
It shows how Islam teaches us to protect the vulnerable.
And the fact that he chose to marry Safiya, a woman from a defeated tribe.
It shows his commitment to breaking down those social barriers.
Absolutely. Promoting unity and equality within the Muslim community.
All these stories, they paint such a vivid picture of that early Muslim community. We see their struggles, their triumphs, the enduring power of their faith.
They offer us so many lessons: leadership, compassion, justice, the pursuit of a life that pleases Allah.
They inspire us to live with purpose, to make a positive difference in the world.
It's really interesting how this book, it doesn't just focus on those external conflicts, the battles, it also delves into those internal challenges within the Muslim community itself.
Right, so even among those who shared the same faith, it wasn't always smooth sailing.
Exactly. It's like, take the debate about distributing the spoils after the Battle of Hunain, for instance.
Oh, right. The Ansar, they felt a bit overlooked, didn't they?
They did. They had been so instrumental in the early days of Islam, and when it came to dividing the spoils, they felt like their sacrifices weren't fully acknowledged.
It's a reminder that, even within a community that's united by faith, disagreements can happen.
Absolutely. Especially when you're dealing with resources, perceptions of fairness. It's human nature, I think.
And what's important, I guess, is how those disagreements are handled. And the prophet, well, he addresses those concerns directly. He reminds the Ansar that their true wealth is not in those material possessions.
Exactly. It's about that honor of being with him, those spiritual rewards they had earned through their sacrifices. It's a powerful reminder.
It is. And it's a great example of leadership, isn't it? Acknowledging those feelings, bringing everyone back together. Reminds me of something you said earlier. This book, it's full of these moments that challenge us, make us think.
Oh, I agree. It's not just about the facts and figures of history. It's about those human experiences. There's real struggles, and they feel so relevant even today.
Because even though we're not facing those literal battles, we all have our own struggles, our own internal conflicts. Right?
Exactly. It's like these lessons, they're timeless,
Mm-hmm.
Leadership, compassion, justice, forgiveness, that pursuit of truth.
It's a reminder that faith, it's not just a set of beliefs. It's about how we live our lives, how we treat each other.
It's a guide, isn't it, for navigating those relationships, making those tough decisions, facing those complexities. It's not always easy.
It's not. And as we continue to learn from these stories, it's so important to approach them with humility, understanding that context, the nuances of language, the deeper meanings,
These aren't just tales from the past. They're living, breathing lessons for us today.
guiding us to live with integrity, compassion, a commitment to justice.
And as we conclude our deep dive into Sahih al-Bukhari, Book 59, let's try to carry those lessons forward, shall we?
Yes, absolutely. To apply them in our own lives, our communities.
To live in a way that honors those values, those early Muslims, to work toward a world that's filled with peace, understanding, and unity.
Such a powerful message. And I think, one of the key takeaways from this book is that the journey of faith, it's a lifelong process.
It is. It's not a destination, right? It's about constant learning, growth, becoming better versions of ourselves.
Recognizing that we're not perfect, but always striving to embody those qualities. Compassion, justice, truth.
That's the essence, I think. That's the legacy.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through Sahih al-Bukhari, Book 59.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
I hope you found this deep dive enriching, thought-provoking, and until next time, may peace and blessings be upon you.
And upon you as well. Remember, these stories, they're not meant to be forgotten. Think about them, talk about them, and most importantly, try to live them.
Because that's how their impact truly lives on.